Welcome to the Create the Life You Want podcast, where we break down the journey of people just like you going from dream to ownership in business acquisitions, franchises, and startups. I'm your host, Jeremy Ames. Today's episode is brought to you ad-free by Guidant Financial. Guidant is America's leading company helping aspiring entrepreneurs use retirement funds to buy or start businesses. If you're committed to buying or starting a business, you can find out more about your funding options by going to www.guidantfinancial.com. That's Guidant financial.com. Now, let's get started with the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Create the Life You Want podcast. Today, I am joined by Steve Riggin. And as you can see, Steve is dialing in from a kitchen. This happens to be the kitchen of a bed and breakfast that he purchased, and we're going to find out a little bit about how Steve ended up in this kitchen here in a second. So, Steve, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, why don't we start with, tell us what you did in your former life before you became this bed and breakfast business owner.
I was a pharmacist for 40 years, worked for a couple of different companies, major drug chains primarily, and I did that until retirement. So,
how many years did you do that for?
it was 40 years total.
Years.
Several different companies. My last company was 27, and it's retail pharmacy, and I was a supervisor as well for about 12 of those years, which means I had multi-store responsibility.
Yeah, so you did that for 40 years. You climbed the ladder in the pharmacy industry. I'm curious. So it sounds like you hit retirement for that business. Was that something that you just decided you wanted to get out of and do something different? Did you decide you really wanted to retire? Like, help us understand why you didn't just move to Boca Raton and start playing shuffleboard.
Yeah, no. First of all, I'm a young man. You know, when I retired, I was only, I guess 62 maybe.
Yeah.
I mostly didn't want to do what I was doing anymore. You know, retail pharmacy, you've probably heard on the news if you follow it at all, is a tough business, and it's only gotten tougher. And like a lot of, I think a lot of businesses that they change over time, no matter what business you're in, right? You know, I don't care if you're a policeman or a fireman or a lawyer. The business you got into probably wasn't the business that it is today, just through natural evolution. So go ahead.
What happened for you that you got to this point where you decided, I just can't do this anymore?
Well, if you want specifics, I was working as a pharmacy supervisor, which again has multi-store responsibility. And we went from the educational point of view, which is really what I enjoyed doing, to more of an accountability point of view. Yeah. So I found it very difficult to hold people accountable for something that I didn't believe in myself. And I said, I can't do that part of the job anymore. So then I went back to what we call going back to the bench. So I went back to filling prescriptions, stepped back.
Yep.
And I was in a pharmacy that was actually part of the news cycle during the Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore, Maryland in 2015. And my store was burned to the ground during the Freddie Gray riots.
Oh, wow.
I was there about an hour or two prior to the rioters arriving on site. So that was a kind of an alarming situation. This was in West Baltimore, which is a tough area. Left there for a year while they rebuilt. They asked me to go back because, like in a lot of situations, the neighborhood, the people weren't the problem with the rioting, right? The people were the ones that needed the services. They rebuilt the store. They asked myself and the store manager to go back because the people in the neighborhood know me. And so I agreed to that. So I went back to that same neighborhood for about another 4 years, maybe 3 or 4 years. And again, that neighborhood is just a tough neighborhood. And it was depressing to drive to work every morning, driving through the area. Rundown, ramshackle kind of locations, drug markets, and all kinds of things. And I used to have quit days and stay days is how we referred to it.
What does that mean?
That means I got to, some days went well and it was a stay day. Okay, I can do this. I'm all right. And then a couple days where I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
The people were tough. I had to be tough back. You got to show strength with strength, or else you're going to be squashed. And I didn't like who I was while I was working there, the person I had to be. And I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. So I started looking for alternatives. I couldn't retire straight out, particularly for two reasons. One, I didn't want to do nothing. Boca Raton and play shuffleboard. That's just not me.
Yeah.
But I'm not a fisherman. I'm not a golfer. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? As an aside, my in-laws retired and did nothing and died early in their 70s.
Yeah.
My father retired and did everything. He's 89 and still kicking today. Still, in fact, I talked to him this morning. He's off to play golf. Because he stayed active. And so that taught us a lesson. We're not going to sit around and do nothing.
Yep.
So we came to the idea, basically one night I'm lying in bed on a quit day, and I just Googled bed and breakfast for sale out of curiosity. And up came a company that is a consulting firm and a real estate firm specializing in bed and breakfast. Had unlike a lot of websites, their website had a lot of information free, just reading about it, how to evaluate it, what kind of B&Bs there are. And part of that was financing and how to finance it. And so the rollover for business startup process was mentioned in that one of those articles. So we started to do some more research on it. And we found this inn was relatively close to our home that we were living. It's about 2 hours away. It's a beautiful inn on the Chesapeake Bay. We're surrounded by water. And we started the process. And then when we looked into the ROBS process, I said we could do this. I was in good enough shape with my 401k that we could use that to begin the process.
Well, let me back up because I think there are some real nuggets that you shared here, Steve. One, it sounds like you went through this journey in your corporate career where you had two instances where the job was pulling you in a direction where you weren't happy with who you were becoming. You weren't happy being in a management role where you had to enforce things that you didn't believe in. And you weren't happy stepping back into a role where you had to interact with people in a way that wasn't consistent with who you were at your core. And does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, that's, it was partly around that specific neighborhood. Maybe if I had been in a different, area, but retail pharmacy in general and the demands on retail pharmacy were really getting, for me, too much,
Yeah.
Thank God I was out right before COVID. When COVID hit, my number one statement was like, God only knows how they stayed alive while they were with COVID. How we would have staffed our stores, and it would have been a nightmare. Sure it was.
Yeah. And it sounds like there were two other important pieces here. One was you weren't quite at a place where you felt comfortable with the entirety of what you had saved for retirement. So you weren't financially ready to be done yet. And the second is you had seen these things in your life where the people who retire and do nothing go into decline. And so you're channeling a little bit of your dad that says, hey, I want to stay relevant and do something that's meaningful. It sounds like it was just happenstance. What made you think about a bed and breakfast? Had you thought about becoming a business owner before or thought about owning a bed and breakfast?
Yeah, I mean, in the pharmacy field, I actually attempted to start to buy into a franchise pharmacy back many years ago, probably inside of my first 10 years operating. I said I could do a franchise. Frankly, I've always hated bosses, right? I mean, and the only way to do that is to be your own.
Yep.
And so I did look at that, but through happenstance and some issues with the franchise company at the time, it fell through and we never progressed. So it was always in the back of my mind. I liked being supervision. I liked managing people. That really wasn't an issue, until it got to the point, like I said, where it shifted from education,
Yeah.
teaching people, teaching other pharmacists how to be better at their job versus holding them accountable because they weren't meeting a random number that the
Yeah.
corporate assigned.
Sounds like it shifted from a growth focus, you're here to grow people, to a judgment focus. You're here to whittle out people. And
Correct. In
yeah.
fact, in fact, if you want that detail, I was sitting in a meeting, what we called a regional meeting with um, other supervisors and district managers and my boss, region manager, who was new to the area. And we were in a particularly tough area, which incorporated around the District of Columbia and some of Maryland, and some very difficult area, uh, according to the numbers that corporate wanted. And so this guy was going to come in and he was going to change the world. And he was telling us, who had been here for years, all the wonderful things he was going to do and how we were going to hold people accountable, we were going to fire people, and we were going to get things straightened out. And I can remember it like it was yesterday because he said, and this is going to be a lot of fun. And I said to myself, it doesn't sound like my idea of fun. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's not what I want to do. And I called my wife and I said, I'm out. And I said that I don't want to do this kind of thing. I'm not. And interestingly enough, and I also have been around long enough to see the writing on the wall, within a year or two, no one that's sitting at that table had their job.
Yeah.
So they were held just as accountable. So I got out while I was in control instead of when they were in control.
Yeah.
I could see that coming as well.
So it sounds like you had contemplated business ownership before because of this franchise pharmacy thing. So that sort of presented itself as an opportunity. Had the thought ever crossed? How did you get to a bed and breakfast that you're randomly sitting in your bed one night on a quit day saying, "Hey, I'm going to do a little search here"?
Yeah, I think bed and breakfast. I think almost everybody has thought about running a bed and breakfast if they've ever been to one. They kind of think it looks cool from the outside.
Yeah.
We've had many guests tell us, "Oh yeah, I'd like to do that." And so we were kind of in that same boat. We had been to bed and breakfast, and we had talked about it. There was a contest, and I don't know if you've heard of these or not. There was a contest many years ago where they were raffling off a bed and breakfast.
Like the business
The
and the
business.
real
And what
estate?
they did,
Oh, wow.
and for a while there, they were doing homes the same way. They would sell for $1,000 ticket, they would sell 300 tickets,
Oh,
or
wow.
for $500 ticket, they'd sell 600 tickets, right?
Yeah.
And so they got their money, their 300,000 or whatever it was. These are random numbers. I don't remember the details, but the point is you got the house or the B&B. So
Yeah.
my wife was all excited. She says, "Well, I can do this." And you had to write a essay as to why you wanted to run a B&B. Well, she never got around to doing it. We never entered. But it did bring up the conversation.
Yeah.
So when the time came, what could I do differently? Well, pharmacy is a career that really has golden handcuffs. You really can't go anywhere else and make the kind of money that I was making.
Yeah.
I couldn't even go to other retail because as a pharmacist, I was probably paying twice what their management, even their middle level management, was making.
Yeah.
So there was really no option where I could go and have the income that I wanted. And I still had the typical middle class debts and mortgages and car payments and student loans for the kids or whatever.
Yeah.
So what else could I do? With the B&B, we basically sold everything. And sold the house, sold the kids. No, we didn't sell the kids. Sold the house, paid off all our debts, and
Interesting.
came
So
here. So
with a bed and breakfast, because you're also getting a place to live, you sold your home and took the equity and used that as a way to massively reduce your expenses and
correct.
therefore how much you needed to make.
Correct. And we paid off all our debt. Some of it went to the operation, but most of it went just to get cleared up.
Yeah.
And so we basically got here debt free beyond the business loan that was required, and we're still debt free. Of course, a B&B has another advantage is that almost all your expenses are paid for by the business.
Yeah.
I take very little out of the B&B for my own personal expenses. My biggest personal expense is dining out.
Yep.
I mean, we everything else, gas and electric, mortgage, everything comes out of the B&B, which is an advantage in itself.
Yeah. So walk us through a little bit. So you do this search late at night. You find this consulting company / brokerage that specializes in B&B. Where did you go from there?
They actually held seminars.
Okay.
1 day, 2 day, and 3 day seminars. And there was a seminar going to be held at the Baltimore Washington International Airport, BWI Airport in Baltimore, a 1 day thing. So I signed up for it, $99. We went to the seminar. It was primarily around how to evaluate bed and breakfasts. It really isn't about running them.
Yeah.
It's about evaluating them, and a little bit about business sense. But having been in where I was as a supervisor, I knew how to read P&Ls. I knew how to evaluate businesses and stuff. So that was just kind of focused on the B&B business itself, what they look for, And like I said, this particular B&B was local. And we actually, the same day, this was in February, it was Valentine's Day weekend when I first looked at the website. And we drove down here Valentine's Day weekend just to kind of snoop around.
Yeah. Did you book a room?
No, we didn't even do that. It was a day trip.
Yep.
And knocked on the door, and the previous owner was gracious enough, invited us in, gave us a little tour of the inn. We told him we were just starting, that we didn't know what we were, if we were doing anything or not. He was very nice about it. Took us around, and so off we went. So we went to the course, and then at some point, I don't know where Guyton came into the picture exactly, but as part of the discussions with the brokerage, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? The ROBS process came to our attention again. And then we did some due diligence. We did look at some other inns, pulled all the paperwork for this inn, did all the financials and taxes and see what we could do. It was actually, the finance guy actually thought that we weren't going to be successful to start with.
Say more about that. Why?
Well, he didn't think that the business could support our loan that we wanted and us. He said, "Oh, you'd have to have another job." I said, "Well, I'm not getting another job, so I'm not doing that." And so it was on hold for a little while, and the brokers and us discussed it. And what has turned out to be true, and the broker was right, there was a lot of potential in this inn. So we essentially doubled the sales in the time that we've been here.
Well, let's talk about that. And I'll put a pin in a couple of the things I want to ask you about in terms of your financing strategy. But talk about what opportunities the consultant saw and what your sort of plan was coming into the bed and breakfast for how to increase the value.
Well, the previous owners weren't particularly in it for the business. Okay. They were really about redoing old homes. This home is over 100 years old, 1906, 120 years old.
Wow.
It's been remodeled a number of times prior to us arriving here. They came here with the intention of doing some work on an older home, and I think that they had hoped that the B&B business would help support that process. So they really weren't driving the business. They were doing very, very little marketing, very little anything, a little bit of Facebook. They weren't involved with what we call online travel agencies, which would be Expedia, Booking.com, those kind of things. They weren't involved with any of those. Their website, the previous owner was a what do you call it, designer?
Interior design?
No. signs and fonts
A
and
graphic designer.
graphic designer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Don't get old. Your memory starts.
It's already happening to me, Steve.
Yeah. Let me pull that shade down real quick. I'm getting into the sunlight here. I think it'll make it a little easier for you to see.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, he was a graphic designer, so he did all the work and design programming. He did his website, but the website was weak. It wasn't a marketing style website.
It was pretty, but it wasn't particularly helpful in driving sales.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it did the basics, but
Yeah.
it didn't drive anything.
And so, do you remember what the occupancy rates were when you took ownership of the bed and breakfast?
They were running around 35 to 38%.
Oh, wow. So really low.
Really low, but well, for B&Bs, 45% occupancy is desirable. Is about what
Really?
you can expect in most B&Bs. The hotels need 90%,
Yeah.
but a B&B 45 is typical. We got it up to 45, but more importantly, we probably almost tripled, 2.5 times their average daily rate. They were real low in rates.
Underpricing it as well.
I mean, the first thing I did was bump rates up. And now there are companies, I'm actually working with an AI company that actually looks at when people are looking at the inn, when they're online, what they're searching for, what dates they're searching for.
Yep.
And they adjust almost automatically the rates so that we're getting the best rate possible for that particular day.
Genius. You're like an airline already, Steve.
It's exactly like that. I mean, I was doing that manually. It's called yield management.
Yep.
And I know Uber and some have tried to do something similar, but airlines are typically good for it, and most hotels are as well.
Yeah.
So I was doing manual yield management, but we jumped the pricing right away.
Did you learn any of that in the pharmacy world? I mean, I'm afraid to ask because I know how expensive pharmaceuticals are already.
No, I didn't learn things like yield management. That came from seminars. For example, that first seminar that I went to, they discussed yield management a little bit. And then prior to purchasing, we also did we actually have national conferences. Association of Lodging Professionals holds national conferences. So we went to one actually before we sold, and they had seminars on yield management and pricing and their contention. And since then, I've met a lot of B&B owners, and I agree. Their contention is most B&Bs are underpriced.
It's probably true for most businesses that are being sold are underpriced.
Maybe. I mean, I had guests tell me you could get a lot more for this, and that was after I raised the price.
Yeah.
So I did raise it some more. Raised it to the point that I thought I was beginning to lose guests because I wasn't. Yeah. I had reached my maximum, so we backed it off a little bit, and now this AI company has some data that they can use to make those moves more data driven rather than my own gut feeling.
So have you doubled profit or more than that even?
Yeah, I don't even remember what we call NOI, net operating income. I don't even know if I remember what theirs was. But ours is a lot more than what it was, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Now we've not had any taxable income really until this year, by design. I mean, between
depreciation and all the other things.
And we put a lot of money into not necessarily repairs, but maintenance and repairs and cleaning up, and so we had a lot of capital expenses and things.
At what point did you decide it sounds like it stalled out because you had this finance professional you were working with that didn't think the operating income was going to be there to cover the debt payment? How did you break through that? Did you just come to a feeling with the consultants when you did a P&L where it was, hey, I believe in this?
I think we looked at it again, and I really have to credit one of the consultants that we were working with. He basically it's a small world, the B&B world.
Yeah.
So the finance guy knows the consultants. They work together all the time. And he's like, Rick, you you're full of it. He can do that, and we sat down and showed the numbers again.
Yep.
And Rick said, all right, well, let's go ahead and try. So we went ahead and applied for the loan and went forward from there.
Well, let's talk about the financing then, because B&Bs are interesting, right? You've got an underlying piece of real estate that usually can get traditional financing. You've got some goodwill in the business that sometimes gets an SBA loan. Sounds like you also use some retirement funds. So how did you put together this whole financing package to make the deal happen?
Well, I got to give credit to Rick Newman, who's the finance guy. He did 98% of the work. He found the banks. He put it. Now we paid him a pretty penny too, I'll say on the side, but that's okay because I really didn't know.
Yeah.
So it was really I used the 401k money primarily for down payment, and took out a loan for 80% of the balance and 70% of the balance, something like that. And it's a business loan. It's not a real estate loan. In fact, if you were to look up our address on Zillow, it won't be there. We're not listed as a residence. In fact, it's driven us a little crazy because the post office, not the post office so much, but vendors, depending on the database that they use,
Yeah.
they can't find us. There is no, our address is 125 Charles. There is no 125 Charles Street. I'm like, yeah, it is. I'm sitting here. I know it's, but it's not listed in some of the residential databases.
Yeah.
So it was very simple. It was, I remarked at the time at closing, it was much easier than buying a house.
Yeah.
I mean, the closing for it was far simpler than when you buy a residential piece of property.
So it sounds like you used 80%, you just bundled that all in one loan. So you didn't do two separate loans. It was one loan, it was a business loan. You brought in the down payment primarily from retirement funds, brought in a little extra cash from the home equity to help with some ongoing maintenance and improvements and stuff.
That cash and part of the 401k rollover piece probably also went just for operating capital.
Yeah.
Which was good to have. Since you have potential business owners, we all know that, or if they don't know, they should, that lack of capital is the number one reason they fail.
Yep.
Right. If you don't have enough money to keep it going. Ironically enough, the way I set it up, I told people I had enough capital to survive a year with the current expenses, meaning under the previous owner, and no guests. So I could pay the bills for a year.
Yeah.
Turns out COVID hit.
So it was pressure.
So it was damn good that I had it. Now we were able to get some things with COVID, and we were only really closed about 8 weeks.
Okay.
My wife likes to say that I was to blame for COVID because I bragged that we could go without guests.
So you were tempting the universe.
Something like that. Yeah. Something like that. But yeah, so I was well capitalized because of those funds.
Yeah.
So I didn't really, when COVID hit, I didn't panic. We were able to maintain our bills. And then, like I said, there were things made available to us, grants and loans and whatnot. And, so there we are.
And you found out about those grants and loans just from your network of other bed and breakfast owners that you knew?
Actually, I live in Calvert County, Maryland, and Calvert County was amazing. They literally called me up and said, we have money for you. Apply. Please apply. We have money for you. And I said, okay. So I did. I really didn't do a whole lot of looking. They came to me.
That's amazing. Kudos to the county. You don't see that.
They did a heck of a job. Yeah. I mean, the federal government threw the money at them and they were like, okay, now what do we do? And because there wasn't a lot of communication. I mean, the SBA loans, the what was it, PPE or whatever, PPE, we weren't eligible for because we had no payroll. So there was really nothing for that. I did apply for what was known as the EIDL, which was the emergency loan, only because I didn't know what was going to happen. Right.
Yeah.
At the time they came out, this could have gone on for years for all I knew. And I didn't want to wait and then be shut out. So I said, let me go ahead and apply for it.
Yeah. When things got back online, did you pay that off or did you say, hey, this has a 30?
No, I ended up using it for that. I ended up using it for maintenance and stuff. So
that's the best loan ever.
Yeah. I mean, it's 3.5%. I'm over 30 years, I'm not losing a lot of sleep over it. But
Yeah.
those things. But we had um, several grants from the county that came in handy, and again, we were capitalized, so it's not the need wasn't really so great. But
Yeah.
if they're going to give it to me, I'm going to take it. So
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, I mean, outside of just COVID, you did some work to understand the industry. You walked in obviously with a certain set of expectations. So, what surprised you, both on the good side and the bad side?
I don't know that I was surprised. Running a B&B is not that complicated. Um, my wife likes to say it's not hard work, but we work hard.
What does
Um,
she mean by that?
well, it's we're up at 7 in the morning. Well, we started out getting up at 6, but now we know what we're doing. We get up at 7ish in the morning, and you start going, and you don't stop until 5 in the evening. It, and you probably could go longer, except we don't. We just say we're done for the day.
Yeah.
We do a lot of it's so right after COVID, as part of the COVID process, we have 7 rooms. Because of the magic number 10 that was out there, we said we would only book 5 at a time. That gives you 10 people.
Okay.
And we put 24 hours between rooms. So that was kind of a hotel industry recommendation. Put 24 hours between guests in your rooms. So that gave us plenty of time to do cleaning and turning the rooms and everything. It took a while to get to 5 when we first opened.
Yeah.
But eventually we got to 5, and eventually we stopped the 24 hours, and then it got crazy, and I did have to hire a part-time housekeeper.
Yeah.
But it's not hard work in that it's, Shawn does most of the baking. We collaborate on cooking, everything else. I was doing most of the cleaning prior to getting a housekeeper. But there's running to the store, and there's, maintenance. And today this morning I had to repair a box spring that somebody broke. I mean, just little stuff. So it's not like it's hard work, but we're busy all the time, and
Yeah.
and we're working hard.
And how does it compare to your life as a pharmacist?
Oh, I haven't been cursed at in 5 years. I mean, that's a plus right there.
Did that happen a lot in the
Oh,
pharmacy?
oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, people aren't happy. Just go online and check YouTube sometime. Life in the Pharmacy or something. You'll see some recorded experiences out there. I'm my own boss, which I've always wanted to be. I don't answer to anybody except my guests. I set my hours. We decide when we want to work, when we don't want to work. Now, we want to work. That's how we drive the occupancy. Just to flash back to what we talked about the previous owners, they took a lot of time off.
Yeah.
That was another impact on their occupancy. But we have, if something comes up, we have a baptism for a grandchild or something. We have ways of either closing down if we need to, or we can hire what are called interim innkeepers, which are inn sitters, and they'll come out and cover the inn. And that brings us, I guess, to the biggest downside is that we don't have the ability just to walk out the door all the time.
Yeah.
You got to plan ahead. We do some good vacations, but they have to be planned ahead. You can't say, "Oh, it's a beautiful weekend. We're
Just
going to
go.
the beach." You can't do that.
Yeah.
So that would be a downside of the business, but you learn to manage that. You learn to take time.
Yeah, and it sounds like the two options you have there are the interim innkeeper. Sounds like you do that at least 1 week a year in the summer when it's your busy time. How do you guys think about vacations and time off and what you're trying to do?
Like everybody else, you just kind of plan. We have an Alaska cruise coming up in September, and we're going to have in-sitters for it. Now, we've developed a network of in-sitters that we trust. Right? That took a little while to really, let it go for a week or 10 days. We've actually trained a couple. We had a couple here as guests that we started telling the story to. And they said, that sounded really cool. We'd like to do that. And I said, oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Right. I said, go ahead and call me if you're interested. and damn if they didn't. So they trained with me several weekends, and now they've covered weekends and a full week with us. They're relatively local. So if an emergency does come up, there's a good chance they'll be able to cover us. Because that's also, without being too much on a downer, when we first got here, unfortunately we had a couple untimely deaths in the family. So getting to the funerals was a challenge. In fact, we ended up having to close and cancel guests and move them to other inns because we had to go to the funeral. There wasn't an option, and we had guests scheduled.
Yep.
So we actually, not only did we move them to inns, but we paid for them to stay at the inns. And thankfully, the inns locally had rooms available. Only one of our guests that weekend ended up canceling altogether, but the rest of them moved. So that is a downside.
You're
I'm just not able to at the door.
I'm curious because it sounds like that's the big downside of a B&B, in that you've put some solutions in place over the last few years to address that. Knowing what you know today, is there anything you would have done differently coming into the business to give yourself a little more flexibility for that?
Maybe reached out to the Insider Network earlier, but we did. But then again, you had that same issue with, on short notice, the insiders they're booked. They're doing other things. And so, it took us a while to find somebody local who was interested. And so now we have that. But I think
it sounds like you curated that just from your own guests, which is brilliant.
And well, it was serendipitous. I mean, they asked us, In fact, when they left, I didn't expect to hear from them, but we did. And they've actually turned into pretty good friends, and they come down. They've been with us now quite a while, and they're going to cover us for the ALP convention in March. And then we'll see. My wife's a little nervous about them having the cruise is a 12 to 14 day thing, and she's not sure they're ready for that, but we'll see as it gets a little bit closer.
When you have to decide who is going to.
Well, we have to put the word out. That we've had a couple others that do long term and do very well. So we kind of have those in our back pocket, but I can't wait too long or they'll be booked.
Yep. So Steve, I'm curious how you and your wife are thinking about the next 5 to 10 years, right? You decided 62 was an age you didn't want to be done. You've talked about your dad staying relevant and, busy to keep his mind sharp. Like, how are you thinking about the next stage?
Well, the second mistake that most B&B owners make after pricing, which we discussed earlier, is waiting too long to sell. They wait until they're too tired, not healthy. They let the inn go. Now I'm fed up. I'm tired. I'm out.
Yeah.
Well, your price starts going down at that point. You're not getting the full benefit of it. You have to go out on top. So it probably won't be very much longer and it's not like a house. They don't sell overnight.
Yeah.
When we bought this inn, it was on the market for almost 2 years.
Okay.
So you can't say, "Oh, we'll sell it and be gone in 6 weeks." That's not going to happen.
You got to be patient.
The 1-800 buy my house now people aren't interested. They're not going to buy it. So you have to plan ahead. So we will probably start thinking about putting it on the market in the spring, just at a relatively high price, just to see if anybody nibbles. If it takes a couple years, we're still fine. We can still do it. Kind of interestingly, though, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a guest come in. They're moving up to Maryland from Florida because they don't like Florida anymore and too hot for them. And they were house hunting up here. They were looking for other places.
Yep.
And they went out house hunting and everything. They came back and they said, "Are you thinking about selling anytime soon?" And we're like, "Well, not really, but if the price is right." And they said, "Because we think we might want to buy it as a house, not as an inn."
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, "Well, it's a pretty big house." I said, and I can probably sell it with the business, which means it's going to be more than the residential. "Oh yeah, that's fine." Okay. They just sold their business for $3 billion or something and had a home worth almost that much. So they were like, we'll pay cash. And I'm like, all right, make me an offer. And it's been a few weeks and I haven't heard from them. So
Yeah, so we'll see.
We'll see if it really happens. But you never know. It could come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
So sounds like you guys have a good plan for thinking with the end in mind of let's go out on top in this particular business. You don't strike me as the kind of guy then who's just going to fade off into the sunset and try and pick up golf. So how are you thinking about the stage after that?
Well, that's the big question. The third career could be that interim innkeeper process. Because that you can control your days, when you want to work, where you want to work, travel around the country, which I enjoy doing, traveling. So that's a possibility. It's the same issue. I want to sit around and do nothing.
But with the skill set you developed, it sounds like you can do it a little more on your time. So it's more of you can phase out how much time you're working.
Exactly.
And not have to be 100% all encompassing.
Exactly. And some of former innkeepers have gone on to the interim innkeeper process, but also working for some of the marketing companies and stuff.
Huh.
So they work with other innkeepers around their business.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'd like that or not. That sounds too much like having a boss, and I don't want to do that. But the interim innkeeper part interests me, that I'm able to, like you said, I can work a couple weeks a month or a couple weeks a year.
I could see you doing some mentorship with people, helping them on thinking about pricing and some of this other stuff that you've talked about.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be doing a customer expectation seminar in March at the ALP conference in Louisville, Kentucky. We'll be doing that.
Well, congratulations. You're already an expert, Steve.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I think it's more, frankly, the customer expectation part probably comes more from my previous life than it does from this one.
Yeah.
But it transitioned very easily. I mean, it's the same customer service attitude.
Yeah, same attitude, but less difficult customers, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Steve, I'm curious, you've now been in this business for how many years?
Almost 5.
Almost 5. Knowing what you know today, someone new comes to you and they're thinking about starting a new business. What is the single best piece of advice you would give them as they consider going down this path?
Just have do the due diligence and pay attention. If you don't know business, learn. I'm talking about general business. I mean, know what a profit and loss statement is. Know what a income operating statement looks like, as business in general. And then the capitalization part is absolutely imperative. I mean, you cannot go in there with bare bones and expect to succeed, because something will happen. Expect the unexpected, and it will happen. Whether in our case it was COVID, but with other businesses, it could be any number of things. Don't be afraid to get advice. Hire the right people, the accountants, the lawyers, the guidance. I'll throw a plug in for you.
Yeah.
The right financing guy to help me out. And
it sounds like you got great value out of Rick Newman as well, this consultant that was.
Yeah. I mean, he does. We're still friends. We still see him at the conferences. He's still in the business, and that's primarily what he does. His company is called In Financing, and that's what he does.
Yeah.
And he does it in all number of ways. I mean, he did not really. He introduced me to the ROBS process, but he wasn't involved with it. That was between myself and you guys. But he put together the banks and the loans, and he knows the banks that are willing to take on those kind of loans. That's, You walk down to your local bank, chances are they're going to say no before you get seated in the desk, at the desk. You got to know who they are, and that's not easy to find out, I don't think.
Yeah.
That he knew all that. He knew, like I said, it was a pretty penny, I don't mind saying, to pay him, but I think it was worth it. It streamlined unless you already have that experience, unless you already have a banker that you work with that does that kind of lending, or if you don't need a loan at all, which some people do. Some people are in that position.
Yep.
But yeah, just like any business, right? You surround yourself. If you don't know, then you got to find somebody who does and hire them or contract with them. If you don't know it, you got to find somebody who does.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time today. It was fun to hear about your story. I think one thing that's going to resonate with a lot of people is the experience that you had in your corporate career, where you felt like you were being pulled in a direction that didn't align with who you are and who you wanted to be. And so kudos to you for having the courage to do something about it, because I think a lot of people just suffer through to whatever their retirement age is without taking a big risk to try something different.
People said that a lot when we started it, and I guess there is a certain amount of that, but there's an old saying about heroes, right? Heroes is somebody who's too tired to give a damn anymore. And I think that's where you get to in your corporate career. I'll tell you, 98% of the B&B owners that I've met were former corporate people.
Yeah.
No, very few people come out of school and become B&B owners. There are a couple hospitality grads that might do it, but almost everybody are former corporate people that got fed up and said, I'm not doing this anymore. Yeah. And that's where we end up. We go our own route, and it's a business that has the flexibility to it, that even like starting another retail business was on my mind for a while, but that was just a different business with the same problems, and I didn't want to do that. So yeah. The B&B business gives you a different way of looking at things.
Yeah. Why don't we close this out with sharing the single best thing personally for you about having made this shift from the corporate world to what you're doing today?
I don't worry about anything, really. I mean, I guess I'm lucky enough that the business doesn't present issues. The only care is my guests' comfort and having a good experience. That gets me upset. If the plumbing isn't working or the air conditioning didn't work or something, that gets me upset. But it's usually an easy fix, and then I'm fine. Peace of mind. I don't lose sleep over the business.
Well, I want to point out two things that I think are important, because businesses can be stressful, and it sounds like two things you did to really reduce the stress amount. One is you had a really good capitalization philosophy in terms of a rainy day cash in your account where you can handle whatever comes your way, so you don't have to stress out about that air conditioner going out unexpectedly.
Right.
And the second is, it sounds like you really invested in putting some things in place to minimize stress for the business. You did some proactive maintenance. You've been working on how we make sure we have some interim in-sitters. It's just the things that when chaos hits, you have solutions to deal with them.
At least some choices to make.
Yeah.
And I tell a lot of innkeepers when they're starting out, aspiring innkeepers or whatnot, as everything has a cost. It's just a question of what you're willing to pay. If I have an issue where I have to leave, I can close the inn.
Yep.
And that will have a cost. Is the cost worth what I have to close it for? And I guess most businesses are like that, but the difference is, I guess, is it's all mine. I make that choice.
Yeah.
We decide, we're closing. I'm not, I'm closed for Christmas. I'm closed for this. And as an aside, I have my entire family, my dad from Florida, 89 years old, and my siblings and my grandkids here in October, and we closed a whole weekend. That potentially cost me up to $7,000, but I made that choice that was important, and that's what I wanted to do.
And you have the space to host your entire.
I have the space for this, yes, but yeah, that's why they were here instead of somewhere else.
Yeah.
But you make that choice that I can close for the weekend. I'll take a hit, but I can afford it because that's how I've planned things.
Yeah. And
So
what you value, and that time with family is worth something.
absolutely. We don't have with the exception of, and I don't want to repeat myself, but with the exception of leaving on short notice, we don't have a work-life balance issue, really.
Yeah.
Our work is our life and vice versa, but it's okay because it's just cooking, cleaning, and taking care of people.
Yeah, connecting with people.
Many parents will tell you that they think they're running a bed and breakfast anyway. They're just not getting paid for it.
You feel like that sometimes. I felt like that this morning.
There you go. It's the same thing. It really is.
Well, Steve, thanks for taking the time and sharing a little bit with us about your inspirational story of you and your wife sort of taking control of your life. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the Create the Life You Want podcast. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to future episodes by clicking the subscribe button, you know where. If you're an aspiring business owner, you may also want to subscribe to the Create the Life You Want newsletter for more inspiration and tips delivered to your inbox every week. You can find the link to that in the show notes, as well as on my personal website, jeremyames.com. If you've already decided you want to start or buy a business, consider exploring your financing options by heading to our sponsor's website at www.guidantfinancial.com. That's GUIDANT financial.com. See you in the next episode.